The day my daughter got married was supposed to be the proudest moment of my life. Instead, it became the day I realized just how far I'd fallen in her eyes. I still remember standing there in my best suit, the one I'd saved for months to buy, watching as security guards approached me. "Sir, we need you to step back," one of them said, his hand firmly on my shoulder. I looked past him to see my daughter, Rebecca, beautiful in her white gown, standing beside her soon-to-be husband, Carter Williams. He was whispering something in her ear, his eyes fixed on me with contempt. "Keep that old man away," I heard him say. And my daughter, my own flesh and blood, simply nodded. 65 years I'd lived on this earth. 43 of those years spent working at Midwest Manufacturing, starting on the factory floor and eventually becoming a shift supervisor. Not glamorous work, but honest. It put food on the table, clothes on my daughter's back, and eventually paid for her college education. All those years of overtime, of missed weekends, of hands cracked and calloused from labor, all so that Rebecca could have opportunities I never had. And now here I was, being escorted away from her wedding like some unwanted vagrant. I didn't make a scene. That's not my way. I simply turned and walked out of the country club where Thomas and Victoria Williams, Carter's wealthy parents, had arranged this lavish ceremony. As I drove home to my modest two-bedroom house in the suburbs of Chicago, I wondered where things had gone so wrong. When had my sweet little girl, who once rode on my shoulders at the state fair and fell asleep against my chest during thunderstorms, turned into this stranger who couldn't even look me in the eye? The answer, I suspected, had everything to do with the man she just married. Carter Williams, heir to the Williams property development fortune. The man who drove a car that cost more than my house. The man who, from the moment he entered Rebecca's life 3 years ago, had been slowly turning her against me. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't possibly have imagined, was that being humiliated at my daughter's wedding was just the beginning. I was about to discover a betrayal so deep, so calculated, that it would shake the very foundation of everything I believed about family, love, and loyalty. And I was about to learn that even an old man like me still had some fight left. The house felt emptier than usual when I got home that night. My wife, Margaret, had passed away 5 years ago after a long battle with cancer. She would have known what to do in this situation. She always knew how to reach Rebecca, even during her rebellious teenage years. Without Margaret, the distance between my daughter and me had grown wider, and Carter had expertly exploited that gap. I loosened my tie and poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey, the good stuff I kept for special occasions. This wasn't the special occasion I'd imagined, but I needed something to dull the ache in my chest. The house was filled with photographs of happier times. Rebecca's graduation from Northwestern University, family trips to Lake Michigan, Margaret's last Christmas, when she was already too sick to get out of bed, but insisted on directing the decoration of the tree from the couch where we'd set her up. I picked up a framed photo from the mantel, Rebecca at about 8 years old, sitting on my shoulders at a Chicago Cubs game. Her smile was so wide it seemed to take up half her face. Where had that little girl gone? My phone buzzed. A message from my best friend, Frank. "How'd it go, buddy?" Proud papa moment. I didn't have the heart to tell him the truth. Not yet. I simply replied, "Long day. Talk tomorrow." As I got ready for bed, I noticed Rebecca had left me on read when I'd texted her congratulations that morning. No surprise there. She hadn't returned my calls in weeks leading up to the wedding. The invitation itself had arrived late, and I suspected it was only sent because some distant relative had asked about my attendance. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The look of disdain on Carter's face, the security guard's firm grip, my daughter's silent complicity. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The next morning I went through my usual routine. Coffee, toast. The Chicago Tribune spread out on the kitchen table. Tried to focus on normal life, even though nothing felt normal anymore. Around 10, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a brief, hopeful moment, I thought it might be Rebecca coming to apologize. Instead, I opened the door to find a young woman I didn't recognize. She was professionally dressed, with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. "Mr. James Harrison?" she asked. "That's me," I confirmed, confusion evident in my voice. "My name is Melissa Chen from Grayson, Phelps and Associates. I'm here regarding some property documents that require your signature." She offered a business card. I invited her in, still puzzled. I hadn't contacted any law firm, especially not one as prestigious as Grayson, Phelps and Associates seemed to be. We sat at my kitchen table, and she opened her portfolio, sliding several documents toward me. "These are transfer of deed forms for your property at 1472 Oakwood Drive," she explained, pointing to signature lines that had been marked with small red tabs. "I don't understand," I said, not touching the papers. "That's this house. I'm not selling my house." Melissa looked equally confused now. "According to our records, you've agreed to transfer ownership to Rebecca and Carter Williams as a wedding gift. These are simply the formalization of that agreement." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "That's impossible. I never agreed to any such thing." She pulled out another document, a letter with what appeared to be my signature at the bottom. I snatched it from her hands, reading it with increasing disbelief. The letter, dated 3 months ago, stated my intention to gift my house to Rebecca and Carter as a wedding present, in recognition of my declining health and inability to maintain the property. "This is a forgery," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "I never wrote this. That's not my signature." Melissa looked uncomfortable now. "Mr. Harrison, I'm just the messenger here. If there's a dispute about this matter, you'll need to take it up with the parties involved or seek legal counsel." "Oh, I intend to," I assured her, standing up so abruptly that my chair scraped loudly against the floor. I walked her to the door, my mind racing. As she left, she handed me her card. "If you have any questions about the paperwork itself." I closed the door and leaned against it, the forged letter still clutched in my hand. My own daughter was trying to steal my house from under me, the house where she grew up, the house that still had Margaret's rose garden in the backyard. I tried calling Rebecca immediately, straight to voicemail, of course. I tried Carter's number next. I'd only used it once before when I was trying to coordinate wedding details. Also voicemail. I left a message that was probably too measured given the circumstances. "This is James Harrison. I need to speak with you about some paperwork that was just brought to my attention. Call me back immediately." My hands were shaking as I set the phone down on the counter. I needed advice, and I knew exactly who to call. Frank Davis had been my friend for over 40 years. We'd started at Midwest Manufacturing on the same day back in 1980, fresh-faced and eager. He'd gone on to become the company's operations manager before retiring 2 years before me. More importantly, his daughter was a lawyer who specialized in real estate. "Frank," I said when he picked up, "I need Emma's help. It's an emergency." 2 hours later, I was sitting in Emma Davis's office downtown, the forged documents spread out before us. Emma was in her mid-30s, sharp and efficient like her father, but with a lawyer's precision in her speech that Frank had never mastered. "This is clearly fraud," she said after examining the papers. "The signature is close, but there are inconsistencies. More importantly, there's no record of you having this document notarized, which would be required for a property transfer of this nature." "So they can't take my house?" I asked, relief flooding through me. Emma's expression remained serious. "Not with these papers, no, but this attempt suggests they're determined. We need to understand what else they might be planning." "What do you mean?" "Mr. Harrison, forgery is a serious crime. People don't typically jump straight to that level of fraud without trying other methods first. I'm concerned this might be part of a larger pattern." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What should I do?" "First, we need to secure your assets. I'd recommend checking your bank accounts, investment portfolios, anything of value. Make sure there haven't been any unusual transactions or attempts to gain access. I nodded, a knot forming in my stomach. And Rebecca, Carter, Emma sighed, compassion in her eyes. I know this is difficult, but you need to limit communication with them for now. Don't confront them directly about what you've discovered. We need to understand the full scope of what's happening before we take action. As I drove home from Emma's office, my mind was spinning. How had it come to this? What had I done to deserve such betrayal from my own daughter? And how much deeper did this deception go? I spent the rest of the day following Emma's advice. I checked my bank accounts, finding no unusual activity yet. I called my investment firm to ensure no changes had been made to my portfolio or beneficiary designations. Everything seemed secure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was only seeing the tip of the iceberg. That night, as I sat alone in my living room with a cold dinner I barely touched, my phone rang. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. My heart jumped, a mix of hope and apprehension coursing through me. I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Dad," she said, her tone uncharacteristically warm. "I'm sorry I missed your calls earlier. We were still at the hotel recovering from the wedding." "That's all right," I said cautiously. "Congratulations again." "Thank you." There was a pause. "Dad, Carter and I were wondering if we could come by tomorrow. There are some things we'd like to discuss with you, about the future." My grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of things?" "Just plans, financial matters. It would be better to talk in person." Every instinct told me this was related to the forged documents, but Emma's warning echoed in my mind. "Don't confront them directly. Not yet." "Sure," I said, forcing a lightness into my voice that I didn't feel. "How about tomorrow afternoon, around 2? "Perfect. We'll see you then." After we hung up, I called Emma right away to tell her about the conversation. "This is good," she said. "We need to understand their angle. I'll have a colleague come with you, someone who can pose as a financial advisor you've recently hired." The next day at precisely 2 p.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Rebecca and Carter standing there, both dressed casually but expensively. Rebecca gave me a quick, formal hug that felt like embracing a stranger. Carter merely nodded, not bothering to hide his disinterest in being there. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "I've got coffee ready." They followed me to the living room where Emma's colleague, a middle-aged man named Richard Kwan, was already seated, a laptop open on the coffee table before him. "Who's this?" Carter asked immediately, suspicion evident in his tone. "This is Mr. Kwan," I explained. "My financial advisor. I hope you don't mind him joining us. Since you mentioned financial matters, I thought it would be helpful to have him here." I caught the quick glance Rebecca and Carter exchanged, frustration mingled with something else. Calculation, perhaps. "Of course," Rebecca said smoothly, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's probably for the best, actually." We all sat down, the atmosphere tense despite the pleasantries. Richard introduced himself professionally, explaining that he'd recently been hired to help organize my estate and retirement planning. "Actually," Carter said, leaning forward with what I recognized as his business demeanor, "that's partly why we're here. Rebecca and I have been concerned about your living situation, James." The use of my first name wasn't lost on me. Never Dad or even Mr. Harrison. Always James, as if to emphasize I was no relation to him. "My living situation," I repeated. Rebecca jumped in. "Dad, this house is too big for just you. The stairs, the maintenance, the yard work, it's a lot for someone your age to manage alone." "I manage just fine," I said evenly. "But you shouldn't have to struggle," Carter continued, his voice taking on a sympathetic tone that sounded rehearsed. "Rebecca and I have been discussing options that would make things easier for you." "What kind of options?" Richard asked, his pen poised above a notepad. "A retirement community," Rebecca said. "There's a very nice one in Florida, Sunshine Palms. It's near the beach, has excellent healthcare facilities on site, and a vibrant community of seniors." "Florida?" I echoed, genuinely surprised. "I've lived in Chicago my entire life. My friends are here, my doctor, my life." "But Florida has such wonderful weather." Rebecca insisted. No more harsh winters. Think how much easier it would be on your joints. My joints were fine, but I didn't mention that. This facility, Richard interjected. What are the costs associated with it? Carter smiled. That's the best part. If James sells this house, the proceeds would more than cover the entry fee and several years of living expenses. And there it was. They weren't trying to steal my house outright anymore. Now they were trying to convince me to sell it. The housing market in this neighborhood is very strong right now, Carter continued. We've already spoken with a realtor who thinks we could get well above asking price, especially with a quick sale. You've already spoken to a realtor about selling my house, I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Rebecca had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. We were just exploring options, Dad, for your benefit. Richard was taking notes throughout this exchange, his face professionally neutral. And what happens after those several years of covered expenses? He asked. Well, Carter said, shifting slightly, there are various financial products that can help stretch the remaining assets. Reverse mortgages, annuities, which we could help manage, Rebecca added quickly. We only want what's best for you, Dad. I looked at my daughter, this stranger wearing her face, and felt a profound sadness wash over me. Whatever genuine concern she might have had was buried beneath layers of greed and calculation. I could see it now. They wanted me out of the way, my assets liquidated and under their control. The forged deed transfer had failed, so they were trying a different approach. I appreciate your concern, I said finally, but I'm quite happy here. This is my home. The rest of the meeting continued with increasing tension. Carter presented glossy brochures of the Florida facility, complete with smiling seniors and palm trees. Rebecca talked about how much I deserved to relax after working so hard all my life. Through it all, Richard asked pointed questions about finances and legalities that clearly frustrated them. When they finally left an hour later, the mask of concern had slipped considerably. Carter's handshake was curt, his smile tight. Rebecca's goodbye hug was even briefer than her greeting had been. As soon as their car pulled away, Richard turned to me. They're after your assets, Mr. Harrison, all of them. I know, I said quietly. My own daughter. The good news is they don't seem to have any legal footing. The bad news is they're determined and creative. He gathered his notes. I'll report everything to Emma. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you change all your passwords. Consider setting up a trust for your assets, and possibly even installing security cameras around your property. After Richard left, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the life Margaret and I had built together. The thought of selling it, of watching strangers take possession of the home where we'd raised our daughter, was unbearable. But more painful still was the realization that Rebecca, our Rebecca, was capable of such calculated betrayal. I picked up the phone and called Frank. Can you come over? I need a drink and a friend. An hour later, Frank was sitting across from me at my kitchen table, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. I told him everything, the wedding humiliation, the forged documents, today's meeting. Jesus, Jim, he said, shaking his head. I can't believe it. Rebecca was always such a sweet kid. People change, I said, staring into my glass. Or maybe they show their true colors eventually. This isn't her true colors, Frank insisted. This is that Carter guy's influence. He's poisoned her mind against you. I wanted to believe that somewhere inside the cold, calculating woman who'd sat in my living room was still the daughter I'd raised. But I wasn't sure anymore. What are you going to do? Frank asked. Fight, I said simply. This is my home, my life. I won't be pushed aside and robbed by my own flesh and blood. Frank nodded, a grim smile on his face. Damn right, and you won't fight alone. That night after Frank left, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Rebecca as a child, her first day of school, teaching her to ride a bike, nursing her through chicken pox. How had we ended up here? What had changed her so fundamentally? I got up and went to the spare bedroom that had once been hers. It was mostly a storage room now, but I still kept some of her childhood things in the closet. I pulled out a box labeled Rebecca School and began sifting through old report cards, art projects, and essays. Near the bottom, I found her high school yearbook. I flipped through it idly, pausing at her senior picture. She looked so much like Margaret, the same warm eyes, the same subtle smile. The quote beneath her photo read, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." Eleanor Roosevelt. What dreams had led her here? What future was she trying to build that required betraying her father? I put the yearbook aside and continued digging through the box, not sure what I was looking for. Near the bottom, I found a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. They were from Rebecca's first year at Northwestern, back when people still occasionally wrote letters instead of just texting or emailing. I untied the ribbon and began reading, transported back to a time when my daughter still confided in me, still saw me as someone worth sharing her thoughts with. Most were typical college experiences, difficult professors, new friends, the excitement of independence. But one letter, dated November of her freshman year, caught my attention. "Dad, I met someone today who might change my life. His name is David, and he's a teaching assistant in my economics class. He said my paper on wealth inequality was the best in the class. We talked for hours after lecture, and he sees the world exactly like I do. He believes that success shouldn't be measured by how much money you make, but by the positive impact you have on others' lives. It made me think of you, and how you always said honest work is what builds character, not fancy titles or big paychecks. I think you'd really like him." I set the letter down, a memory stirring. David. There had been a David in Rebecca's life briefly during college. She'd brought him home for Thanksgiving that year. A serious young man with glasses and passionate ideas about social justice. Margaret and I had liked him immediately, but by Christmas break, Rebecca never mentioned him again. When I'd asked, she'd changed the subject. What had happened to David? And more importantly, what had happened to the Rebecca who had written this letter? The girl who had valued honest work and character over wealth and status. The next morning, I called Emma Davis with a new request. "I need you to look into someone for me. A man named David who was at Northwestern about 15 years ago, possibly a teaching assistant in economics." "That's not much to go on," Emma said. "Any last name?" "No, just that he knew Rebecca during her freshman year." Emma was silent for a moment. "Mr. Harrison, I understand you're trying to make sense of your daughter's behavior, but I'm not sure this is relevant to protecting your assets." "It might not be," I admitted, "but I need to understand how we got here. There's a piece of this puzzle I'm missing." She sighed. "I'll see what I can find out, but my priority remains securing your legal and financial position. Speaking of which, I've prepared some documents for you to sign that will make it much harder for anyone to transfer or sell your property without your explicit, verified consent." I thanked her and hung up, then spent the morning following her other recommendations. I changed the passwords on all my accounts. I called my bank and added additional security measures. I even contacted a security company about installing cameras around my property. By afternoon, I was mentally exhausted but felt marginally more secure. I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The early autumn air was crisp, leaves just beginning to turn on the trees lining my street. I'd lived in this neighborhood for over 30 years, watched it change and grow, seen neighbors come and go. The thought of being forced out, of ending my days in some sterile facility in Florida, made my chest tighten with anger and resolve. As I rounded the corner toward the local park, I noticed a familiar car parked across the street, Carter's sleek black BMW. I slowed my pace, then stopped completely when I saw him emerge from a cafe, followed by a man in a suit I didn't recognize. They stood on the sidewalk talking intently, Carter gesturing emphatically while the other man nodded. I ducked behind a large oak tree, feeling ridiculous but unwilling to risk being spotted. After a few minutes, they shook hands and parted ways, Carter returning to his car while the other man walked in the opposite direction. I waited until Carter's car had disappeared around the corner before continuing my walk, my mind racing with questions. What was Carter doing in my neighborhood? Who was the man he'd been meeting with? It seemed too coincidental to be innocent. When I returned home, I found a package on my doorstep, the security cameras I'd ordered with expedited shipping. As I installed them around my property that afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was preparing for a siege. In a way, I was. That evening, Emma called with an update. "I found your David," she said. David Chen. He was indeed a teaching assistant in the economics department at Northwestern 15 years ago. He's now a professor of economic ethics at the University of Chicago. Economic ethics, I repeated. That sounds like exactly the kind of thing the Rebecca I knew would have been interested in. There's more, Emma continued. I took the liberty of contacting him, saying I was doing some academic research. He remembered Rebecca quite well. According to him, they dated for several months before she suddenly broke things off without explanation. He said it coincided with her changing her major from social policy to finance and investment. I sat down heavily on my couch. I never knew she changed her major. She told us it was finance all along. "Mr. Harrison, would you like me to arrange a meeting with Professor Chen?" He seemed open to talking more when I mentioned I was from Chicago. I hesitated. Was I going too far down a rabbit hole? But something told me this was important, that understanding what had changed Rebecca during those formative college years might help me understand the woman she'd become. "Yes," I said finally. "Please arrange it." 2 days later, I was sitting in a small cafe near the University of Chicago campus, waiting nervously for a man I'd met only once, 15 years ago. I recognized him as soon as he walked in, older now, with strands of gray in his dark hair, but with the same thoughtful expression behind his glasses. "Mr. Harrison," he said, extending his hand. "It's been a long time." "Please, call me Jim," I said, shaking his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." We ordered coffee and for a few minutes made awkward small talk about the university and the changing neighborhood around it. Finally, I decided to be direct. "David, I'm trying to understand what happened to my daughter. The Rebecca I knew, the one you knew, seems to have disappeared. In her place is someone I barely recognize." David nodded slowly, considering his words carefully. "I've often wondered about Rebecca myself. Our relationship was brief but intense. We connected over shared values, a belief that economics should serve humanity, not the other way around. Rebecca was passionate about using her education to help reduce inequality, to make systems more fair." "What happened?" I asked. He sighed. "I wish I knew exactly. Around November of her freshman year, she was invited to a special networking event for promising business students. It was exclusive. Only a few freshmen were selected. When she came back, something had changed. She was suddenly talking about investment banking, about wealth creation strategies. Within weeks, she'd changed her major and stopped attending the social justice discussion groups we'd both been part of. And your relationship? She ended it just before Christmas break. Said we wanted different things from life." He paused, a shadow crossing his face. "The last time I saw her, she was with a group of finance majors at an expensive restaurant downtown. I waved, but she pretended not to see me." I stared into my coffee cup, processing this information. "Do you remember anything about this networking event? Who organized it?" David thought for a moment. "It was sponsored by the Williams Foundation, I believe, a philanthropic organization connected to a major real estate development company." My head snapped up. "Williams, as in Williams Property Development?" David nodded. "That sounds right. Why?" "My daughter married Carter Williams 3 days ago. He's the heir to Williams Property Development." Understanding dawned on David's face. "So she's been connected to the Williams family since college. That explains a lot." "How so?" "The Williams Foundation had a reputation even then. They sponsored events, scholarships, research positions, but always with strings attached. They identified promising students early and groomed them for roles that would benefit their corporate interests." He paused. "I'm not suggesting anything inappropriate, but they were known for being very strategic about cultivating relationships with students who might be useful to them later. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Had Rebecca been targeted all those years ago, identified as someone who could be molded, reshaped to serve the Williams family's interests? "There's something else you should know," David said, lowering his voice slightly. "Williams Property Development has a certain reputation in ethical investment circles. They've been investigated several times for questionable business practices. Nothing has ever stuck legally, but they're known for aggressive tactics, particularly in acquiring properties in neighborhoods they want to develop." "What kind of tactics?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew. "Pressuring elderly homeowners to sell below market value, using shell companies to hide their involvement in purchases. There were even rumors of fabricated code violations to force people out of their homes." He shook his head. "Again, nothing proven conclusively, but the pattern is concerning." I thanked David for his time and insights, promising to stay in touch. As I drove home, my mind was piecing together a troubling narrative. The Williams family had identified Rebecca early in her college career. Somehow, they'd managed to transform her from a socially conscious young woman into someone who aligned with their values and interests. And now, years later, she had married into the family and was helping them target her own father's property. But why my modest house? It was worth maybe $400,000 in the current market. Hardly a major acquisition for a company like Williams Property Development, unless there was something more going on in my neighborhood that I didn't know about. When I got home, I immediately booted up my old desktop computer and began researching recent property sales in my area, development plans, zoning changes. It took hours of digging through public records and local news sources, but eventually I found something. 3 months ago, the city council had quietly approved a zoning change for a 6-block area that included my street. The change would allow for mixed-use development. Residential properties could now be converted to commercial use or demolished to make way for larger structures. Further searching revealed that in the past 2 months, 4 houses on my block had sold to different buyers. But when I cross-referenced the corporate registration information for each buyer, I discovered they all traced back to shell companies with connections to Williams Property Development. They were buying up the neighborhood piece by piece, likely planning some major development. And my house sat right in the middle of their target area. I called Emma immediately and shared what I'd found. "This explains why they're so determined," I said. "My house isn't just my house to them. It's an obstacle to a multi-million-dollar development plan." "This is valuable information," Emma replied. "It gives us leverage. If they're trying to acquire your property through fraudulent means as part of a larger development scheme, we could potentially bring this to the attention of regulatory authorities or the media." "I don't want to go public yet," I said. "Not until I understand the full scope of what's happening, and not until I've tried one more thing." "What's that?" "Talking to my daughter, the real Rebecca, if she's still in there somewhere." The next day, I texted Rebecca asking to meet. Just the two of us, no Carter, no lawyers or advisors. To my surprise, she agreed, suggesting a coffee shop downtown near her office at Williams Property Development, where she'd been working since graduating from Northwestern. The coffee shop was upscale and minimalist, the kind of place where a simple cup of coffee cost $5. Rebecca was already seated when I arrived, dressed in a sleek business suit, her hair pulled back in a professional bun. For a moment I saw Margaret in her features and my heart ached with the memory. "Hi, Dad," she said as I sat down across from her. Her tone was guarded but not hostile. "Thanks for meeting me," I said. We made small talk for a few minutes. Safe, superficial conversations about the weather, about her honeymoon in the Maldives, about my retirement. Finally, I took a deep breath and decided to be direct. "Rebecca, do you remember David Chen?" The question clearly caught her off guard. Her coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "David, from college, that was a lifetime ago. Why?" "I met with him yesterday." We had an interesting conversation about the person you were back then, about your original major in social policy, about your interest in economic justice. Her expression hardened slightly. Dad, we all have idealistic phases in college. Then we grow up and see how the world really works. Is that what happened? You grew up? Or did someone show you a different path, a path that led you away from the values your mother and I taught you? I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. I know about the Williams Foundation recruitment. I know about the neighborhood development plan. And I know about the attempts to get my house, first through forgery, now through manipulation. Rebecca's face paled. For a moment she looked like she might deny everything. Then her shoulders sagged slightly. You don't understand the opportunities Carter's family has given me, the life we're building together. At what cost, Rebecca? Your integrity, your relationship with your father, the home where you grew up. It's just a house, Dad, she said, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, doubt perhaps, or a ghost of the person she used to be. It's not just a house to me, I said quietly. It's where your mother and I raised you. It's where she planted her roses, where we celebrated your birthdays, where she spent her final days. It's all I have left of our life together. Rebecca looked away, her jaw tight. Carter says sentimentality is an expensive luxury in business. Is that what I am to you now, a business transaction? She didn't answer. Rebecca, I want you to look me in the eye and tell me you're comfortable with what's happening. With the forgery. With trying to manipulate me into selling my home so it can be demolished for some corporate development. Can you do that? For a long moment she said nothing. When she finally looked at me, there were tears in her eyes. It's complicated, Dad. It's really not, I said gently. It's about right and wrong. It's about family. It's about the values that define us when everything else is stripped away. She wiped away a tear, careful not to smudge her makeup. I don't know what you want from me. I want my daughter back, I said simply. The one who believed in something more important than money and status. The one who would have been appalled at the idea of taking advantage of elderly homeowners for corporate profit. Rebecca's phone buzzed on the table. Carter's name flashed on the screen. She glanced at it, then back at me. I have to go. We have a dinner tonight with potential investors. As she stood to leave, I reached out and caught her hand. Just answer one question for me. Are you happy, Rebecca? Truly happy? Something flickered across her face, a moment of raw honesty breaking through the polished facade. I have everything I'm supposed to want, she said finally, and pulled her hand away. I watched her walk out of the coffee shop, her posture perfect, her steps confident. But in that last answer, I'd heard a truth she perhaps hadn't fully admitted even to herself. She had everything she was supposed to want, but that wasn't the same as happiness. And in that small crack in her armor, I saw hope. Hope that the daughter I'd raised wasn't completely gone. Hope that underneath the influence of Carter and the Williams family, some part of the real Rebecca still existed. I had a lot to think about as I drove home. The meeting hadn't gone as I'd hoped, but it hadn't been a complete failure either. I'd seen vulnerability in Rebecca, doubt about the path she was on. It wasn't much, but it was something to work with. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a white van parked across the street that I didn't recognize. As I got out of my car, a man emerged from the van and approached me. "Mr. Harrison," he asked. "I'm from the city building inspector's office. We've received a complaint about possible code violations on your property." I stared at him, David Chen's words echoing in my mind. Fabricated code violations to force people out of their homes. This was another tactic in their playbook. "May I see some identification?" I asked calmly. He flashed a badge quickly, not giving me time to examine it properly. "We need to conduct an inspection immediately. There have been concerns about structural integrity and electrical systems." "I wasn't notified of any inspection," I said. "Complaint-based inspections don't require prior notification," he replied smoothly. "I'll need access to your basement and attic particularly." "I'm going to need to verify this with the city office," I said, pulling out my phone. "What did you say your name was again?" The man hesitated. Look, I'm just doing my job. If you refuse the inspection, I'll have to note that in my report, which could lead to fines or other penalties. I'm not refusing, I clarified. I'm simply verifying that this is legitimate. I'm sure you understand, given the number of scams targeting homeowners these days. As I dialed the city building department's number, the man's demeanor changed. I'll come back another time, he said abruptly and walked quickly back to his van. I watched him drive away, then immediately called Emma to report what had happened. They're escalating, I told her, using multiple tactics now. Document everything, she advised. Take photos of any suspicious vehicles. Get names and badge numbers if possible. We're building a case, and every piece of evidence helps. That evening, I received an email from the neighborhood association about an upcoming meeting to discuss future development opportunities. The sender was unfamiliar, but when I checked the association website, there was no mention of such a meeting. Another angle of attack, trying to gather support for whatever development plan Williams' property had in mind. I forwarded the email to Emma, then sat down with a legal pad and began mapping out everything I knew so far. The forged deed transfer, the pressure to sell and move to Florida, the fake building inspector, the misleading neighborhood association email. When viewed as isolated incidents, each could be explained away. When viewed as a pattern, they painted a disturbing picture of a coordinated campaign to force me out of my home. But why were they so determined? Why not simply offer me a fair, even generous, price for my property? It would surely be cheaper and less risky than these elaborate schemes, unless there was something more at stake than just my house. I spent the next morning at the county records office, researching property values and recent transactions in my neighborhood. The four properties that had been acquired by Williams-connected shell companies had all sold for approximately 20% above market value, generous, but not extravagant. On a hunch, I expanded my search to include properties several blocks away, in an area that had been redeveloped the previous year. What I found was striking. Those properties had initially sold for similar premiums, but after the development was completed, the values of the remaining original homes had skyrocketed, increasing by as much as 300%. This wasn't just about acquiring my property for development. This was about buying properties cheaply before values exploded due to the planned development. By keeping their involvement hidden through shell companies, Williams Property Development could avoid paying fair market values based on the future worth of the properties. It was legal, technically, but deeply unethical, and it explained why they were so resistant to simply offering me a better price. Every dollar they paid now would multiply several times over in lost potential profit later. Armed with this information, I called Frank. I need to talk to some of our old union friends, I told him, particularly anyone who still has connections at City Hall or in the local media. What are you planning, Jim? Frank asked, concern evident in his voice. I'm planning to fight back, I said. Not just for myself, but for everyone in this neighborhood who's being manipulated and cheated. Over the next week, I worked with Frank to quietly reach out to key people, a reporter at the Chicago Tribune who had covered labor issues during our time at Midwest Manufacturing, a city council member who had been supported by our union, former colleagues who had retired to the same neighborhood and might be facing similar pressure. Meanwhile, the attempts to force me out continued. A realtor showed up unannounced, claiming Rebecca had contacted her about listing my house. My homeowner's insurance company called about a cancellation request they'd received, which I had never made. Even my neighbors seemed to be getting involved, with one mentioning that she'd heard I was having financial difficulties and might need to sell quickly. Each incident was documented and added to the file Emma was building. We're almost ready to take action, she assured me, but we need to be strategic about when and how we do it. The opportunity came sooner than expected. One evening, as I was reviewing some of the documents Emma had prepared, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found Carter standing on my porch alone. "James," he said, his tone businesslike, We need to talk. I invited him in, curious about what had prompted this solo visit. We sat in my living room, the tension palpable between us. I'll get right to the point, Carter said. This situation has dragged on long enough. I'm prepared to make you a final offer for the property, 20% above current market value, plus moving expenses and a year's worth of rent at a location of your choice. He slid an envelope across the coffee table. The paperwork is all here, ready for your signature. I didn't touch the envelope. Why the urgency, Carter? His jaw tightened slightly. It's a time-sensitive opportunity. The offer expires at the end of the week. What happens after that? I asked. Let's just say things could become considerably less comfortable for you. The threat was thinly veiled, his tone cold. Are you threatening me in my own home? Carter leaned forward. I'm being realistic. You're fighting forces beyond your control, James. A single holdout can't stop progress. Is that what this is? Progress? Forging documents, sending fake building inspectors, manipulating elderly homeowners. His expression flickered with surprise before he regained his composure. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I think you've been orchestrating this entire campaign, not just against me, but against everyone in this neighborhood whose property you want. Carter's demeanor changed, his false politeness giving way to something harder, more authentic. You know nothing about business, old man. This is how things work in the real world. The strong succeed, the weak get left behind. And where does my daughter fit into this worldview of yours? I asked. Is she just another asset to be acquired and utilized? Something dark flashed in his eyes. Rebecca understands what's at stake. She's been part of the Williams vision since college. We identified her potential early, her intelligence, her malleability. She just needed proper guidance to overcome the limitations of her upbringing. The casual cruelty of his words left me momentarily speechless. This was the real Carter Williams, not the polished businessman but the predator beneath. She's my daughter, I said finally, my voice low with controlled anger. Not some commodity to be acquired and shaped for your benefit. Carter stood, straightening his expensive jacket. Sentiment is a luxury for those who can afford it. Rebecca chose our world over yours a long time ago. This is your last chance to accept reality and take the offer. After Friday, things will proceed with or without your cooperation. As he walked toward the door, I called after him. You've underestimated me, Carter, and you've underestimated what a father will do to protect his family, including from people like you. He paused, looking back with a dismissive smile. Empty threats from a powerless old man. How predictable. After he left, I sat motionless for several minutes, processing what had just happened. Carter's mask had slipped, revealing the true nature of the man my daughter had married. And in doing so, he'd confirmed everything I'd suspected, and given me exactly what I needed. I reached slowly for my phone on the coffee table and stopped the recording app I'd activated just before opening the door. Then I called Emma. I have him, I said simply, his own words admitting to everything. The next morning, I met with Emma, Frank, and the reporter from the Chicago Tribune, Alan Mercer. I played the recording for them, watching their expressions change as they listened to Carter's unguarded admissions. This is explosive, Alan said when the recording finished, especially combined with the documentation you've gathered about the shell companies and the pattern of tactics against other homeowners. Is it enough? I asked Emma. She nodded slowly. For several things. We can file complaints with multiple regulatory bodies. The Real Estate Commission, the State Attorney General's office, possibly even federal authorities if we can establish wire fraud. And with Mr. Mercer's help, the court of public opinion may be even more damaging to Williams' property development. What about Rebecca? I asked, the question that had been haunting me all night. Carter said she's been part of their vision since college, that they identified and recruited her. Emma's expression softened. The recording suggests manipulation and grooming of a young student. Your daughter may be a victim as much as a participant. I need to try to reach her again, I said, before this all becomes public. Be careful, Frank warned. if she tells Carter about your conversation. It's a risk I have to take, I said. She's still my daughter. I arranged to meet Rebecca for lunch at a small restaurant near her childhood home, neutral territory, but with memories that might help remind her of who she used to be. To my relief, she came alone. She looked tired, I noticed immediately. The polished professional veneer was slightly cracked, dark circles under her eyes poorly concealed by makeup, a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Thanks for meeting me," I said as we sat down. She nodded, her expression guarded. "Carter mentioned he came to see you, that you refused his offer." "Rebecca," I said gently, "I need to ask you something important and I need you to be honest with me. Are you happy with the person you've become?" She blinked, clearly not expecting this question. "What kind of question is that? I'm successful, I'm married, I have everything I wanted." "That's not what I asked. Are you happy with who you are? With the choices you've made, with what you've done to get where you are?" Her eyes dropped to the table. "Why are you asking me this now?" "Because tomorrow everything changes," I said. "Tomorrow, the Chicago Tribune runs a story about Williams Property Development's tactics in acquiring properties in our neighborhood. About the forged documents, the fake building inspectors, the shell companies. About how they target and recruit young, promising students to groom for their organization." Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" "I have recordings, Rebecca, documents, evidence of everything, including Carter's own admission that they've been manipulating you since college." The color drained from her face. "You're bluffing." I pulled out my phone, set it on the table, and played a short clip of my conversation with Carter. "Rebecca understands what's at stake. She's been part of the Williams vision since college. We identified her potential early, her intelligence, her malleability. She just needed proper guidance to overcome the limitations of her upbringing." She stared at the phone, then at me, shock and confusion warring in her expression. "I don't understand. Why would he say that?" "Because it's the truth," I said gently. "They identified you as a target in your freshman year. They invited you to that networking event, showed you a world of wealth and influence, and systematically worked to separate you from your original values and goals. From David Chen, from your mother and me, they reshaped you to serve their purposes." That's not how it happened," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then how did it happen, Rebecca? How did you go from a young woman passionate about economic justice to someone who would help forge documents to steal her father's home?" Tears welled in her eyes. "It wasn't like that. It was just business. Just what needed to be done." "For whom? For Carter, for his family? What about what you need, Rebecca? What about the person you were meant to be?" A tear slipped down her cheek. "I don't know who that is anymore." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I do. She's still in there. The daughter your mother and I raised. The woman who believed in something more important than money and power. The Rebecca who would be horrified by what's been done in her name." She didn't pull her hand away. "It's too late," she whispered. "I've gone too far, made too many compromises." "It's never too late to choose a different path," I said. "To reclaim your integrity, your true self." "What are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to remember who you are, and I'm giving you a choice. Tomorrow, that story runs in the Tribune. Williams Property Development will face investigations, lawsuits, public scandal, but your involvement doesn't have to be central to that story." She looked at me questioningly. "If you cooperate, if you provide information about their practices, about how they recruited you and others, about their development plans, you can be positioned as another victim, someone who was manipulated and is now helping to expose the truth. You want me to betray Carter, his family, everything I've been part of for the last 15 years. I want you to do what's right," I said simply. "For yourself, for the other homeowners being pressured and deceived, for the next young student they try to reshape in their image." Rebecca withdrew her hand and sat back, wiping away tears. "I need to think. This is a lot. I understand. But we're moving forward tomorrow with or without your help. I'd rather it be with." As we parted outside the restaurant, I hugged her, a real hug, not the formal, distant embrace we'd shared in recent years. To my surprise, she hugged me back tightly like she used to as a child. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, "for everything." "I know, sweetheart," I said. "I know." I didn't sleep much that night, wondering what Rebecca would decide, whether she would warn Carter about what was coming. But as dawn broke, my phone buzzed with a text message. "I'm in. Tell me what you need." The next morning, the Chicago Tribune published its explosive front-page investigation, Shadow Development: How Williams Property Uses Deception to Acquire Chicago Neighborhoods. The article detailed the pattern of tactics used against homeowners, the network of shell companies, and the broader scheme to artificially manipulate property values. Crucially, it included quotes from a former insider at Williams Property Development who has chosen to come forward, describing how the company identified and recruited promising college students, gradually reshaping their values and ethics to align with corporate interests. By noon, local television stations were running the story. By evening, it had been picked up by national outlets. Williams Property Development issued a brief statement denying the allegations and promising a thorough internal investigation, the standard corporate response to scandal. The following days were a whirlwind. Emma filed formal complaints with multiple regulatory agencies. Other homeowners in the neighborhood came forward with their own stories of pressure and deception. The city council announced a review of recently approved zoning changes. Through it all, Rebecca worked with us, providing documents, details, context that only an insider could know. She moved out of the penthouse apartment she shared with Carter and into a small hotel, ignoring his increasingly desperate calls and messages. A week after the story broke, she came to my house for dinner, the first time she'd been there in years. As we sat at the kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals as a family, she looked around with fresh eyes. "I'd forgotten how much I love this house," she said softly. "All the memories here." "Your mother's touch is still everywhere," I replied, "even after all these years." Rebecca nodded, tears forming. "I miss her, I wish. I wish she could have helped me see what was happening. She would have seen through Carter immediately." "She was always the wiser of us," I agreed. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked. "With the investigations, the lawsuits." "It will take time. These things always do. But Williams Property Development won't recover easily from this. Their reputation is damaged, their practices exposed. The development plan for this neighborhood is already on hold indefinitely." "And Carter," I hesitated, not wanting to cause her more pain. "The recording where he admitted to targeting you in college is particularly damaging. The board of directors has already placed him on administrative leave." She nodded, surprisingly calm. "And us? What happens to us, Dad?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "That's up to you, Rebecca. We can't erase the past 15 years, but we can decide what the next 15 look like." "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, her voice breaking. "After everything I did, everything I was part of." "You're my daughter," I said simply. "You'll always be my daughter, and you found your way back to who you really are. That's what matters now." In the months that followed, Rebecca filed for divorce from Carter. She left Williams Property Development and, with Emma's guidance, cooperated with the various investigations in exchange for immunity from potential charges. She moved into a small apartment near the university, and in a development that surprised us both, reconnected with David Chen, now a respected professor. At first, it was just coffee to discuss the investigation. David had valuable insights into the Williams Foundation's academic recruitment tactics. But their conversations continued, rekindling a connection that had been severed 15 years earlier. As for me, I stayed in my house, the home Margaret and I had built together, where we'd raised our daughter, where so many memories lived in every room. The development plan for the neighborhood was permanently shelved after the scandal, and most of the properties acquired through shell companies were sold off as Williams Property Development struggled to contain the damage to their reputation and finances. Carter eventually reached out with one final offer, a sincere apology and a significantly higher price for my property, no strings attached. I declined. Some things aren't for sale at any price. 1 year after that disastrous wedding day, Rebecca came to visit. We sat in the backyard, among her mother's roses that I'd continued to tend all these years. David asked me to marry him, she said, a cautious happiness in her voice. A small ceremony, nothing fancy, just people who truly care about us. That's wonderful news, I said, genuine joy filling my heart. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become again. Will you walk me down the aisle this time? She asked. For real? Nothing would make me happier, I assured her. As we sat there in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, I thought about the journey we'd been on, about betrayal and forgiveness, about losing your way and finding it again, about standing firm when everything you value is threatened. I thought about that day at the first wedding when the groom had said, "Keep that old man away." How those words had broken my heart, but also started a chain of events that ultimately saved my daughter from a life of compromise and moral corruption. Sometimes, the most painful moments can lead to the most necessary transformations. Sometimes, standing your ground isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about fighting for the true well-being of those you love, even when they can't see it themselves. Dad, Rebecca said, interrupting my thoughts, thank you for not giving up on me, for seeing the person I could be again even when I couldn't see it myself. I squeezed her hand gently. That's what fathers do, sweetheart. We see the best in our children even when it's hidden. We fight for them even when the fight seems impossible to win. I love you, Dad. I love you too. Always have, always will. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.